in general. You know, we all know that. COVID's really affected every single person in the world, let alone just in the plumbing industry. And I know in the building industry where the plumbers are installing new pipe and new systems. At one stage in Victoria, we had about 7,000 plumbers on downtime for about 6 to 8 weeks. But like all things, you know, we work with asbestos and open sewers and heights, you know, the hazards with working in heights and hazards working everywhere. We've adapted very well with the same thing with COVID, is that it's just part of another hazard there that we work with. So the 1.5 metres, you know, the masks or whatever, it's really the same as working with asbestos or something. We just have the proper procedures in place. And now we've got, you know, the full workforce back. So COVID will come and go, I suppose, over time, and no one knows. But, you know, plumbing and basic sanitation, basic sanitation and water and gas, and, you know, we just keep the systems going.
I think the question really is, what impact haven't these measures had? It's been an exceptionally broad-ranging impact right across the industry. I mean, the obvious things are things like businesses that have gone out of business, businesses that have reduced productivity, businesses that have had to change their business model, right down to the very strict occupational health and safety requirements that have been brought into place, so that sites that are operating, and particularly the big sites with 1,000 people on them, as well as the sort of smaller one-on-one sites where people are doing gas appliance servicing, remain safe to both the employees, other people on site, and of course consumers who might be involved as well. And where the building industry has really played an incredible role, and has come together like no other time that anyone can recall, both employer associations, unions, and a whole heap of others bringing technical expertise to develop things like the COVID guidelines for the building industry. So there have been groups that have put an enormous amount of work in at every stage during the coronavirus crisis, as the situation unfolded, as governments would bring in new requirements. The industry has responded magnificently in providing advice to members, to all employees, to keep everybody safe, and as much as we can, to keep the work going.
The most important role that Incolink played during COVID-19 to date is the on-site COVID-19 testing, which has seen us deliver 23,000 tests to industry and helped us demonstrate to government and the wider industry that industry was able to function even under COVID-19. If you think of any workforce that is equipped to deal with hazardous circumstances and hazardous materials, it's the construction industry, where every day you're working with heights and hazardous substances. So we stepped in and offered COVID-19 testing, and that gave people confidence that construction workers were actually really equipped, and also were dealing with COVID-19 pretty well, because in all of our 23,000 tests, we identified just a handful of positives, which resulted in, to go back to your question again, which resulted in detailed site protocols being activated, including often deep cleans and site evacuations, and then mandatory on-site testing over the next couple of days. So that's the role we played. I'm very proud of it. We're very proud of it. And we hope this year to be able to roll out vaccinations across the industry, which will not only keep it functioning, but will absolutely fireproof it for the rest of this pandemic.
Our members have seen an increase in obviously their personal protective equipment that are required when entering homes. I think members have also seen sort of a fear in the community of people coming into their homes in terms of plumbers. They also have had to have an increased understanding of disinfection actions and processes that they need to follow in terms of hygiene. I know we offered a COVID-19 awareness course to our members in the industry, and it was all about design for plumbers and gas fitters to further their knowledge about the safety requirements that they needed on a day-to-day basis to help within the role that they need to complete. It provided sort of best practice in terms of what they should be doing due to the pandemic.
Thanks. So the fire protection industry and the construction and building industry generally has been a model for all of society. The way that we've been able to keep functioning and working through this time. I think that it's important for everybody to understand that no matter what level of lockdown or what situations we find ourselves in, there's two types of people that keep going, and they're our first responders and the others are fire protection professionals. It's simply a statement of fact that there is no point isolating people in a building in quarantine if that building is under the risk of fire, or if buildings next to it are under the risk of fire. And it's been great that authorities, regulators and stakeholders have understood that, and we've all acted swiftly to keep the industry working. And if anything, I think that the community as a whole, especially decision makers, have an enhanced view of the importance of our trades in that regard.
So I think, as the other speakers in this podcast will also say, right across the board. So right at the start, if you look at the timeline when COVID really started to have an impact, you saw a loss of confidence in the market. You saw a number of developers pull out of the large projects, and they might typically be things like large multi-storey commercial housing developments or redevelopments. The consistent package that's gone through has been the government big build projects and government funded projects, but across the commercial sector, at the top end of the scale, developers pulled out. That just meant that there was no work at all for some builders and for some larger plumbing contractors. At the other end of the scale, you have all the domestic works which were either postponed or cancelled because of a lack of consumer confidence, or people had lost their jobs and they didn't want to commit. In some cases, halfway through a bathroom or kitchen renovation. And you add to that period where the industry was entirely shut down, and particularly in the smaller end of the market, doing light commercial and domestic, when you couldn't get any works done apart from emergency work. So an absolutely massive impact, which the industry is still recovering from.
Look, I don't think it's any secret that there's been a collapse in immigration, and this is the story of the pandemic, which will be ridden out in the next few years. We're about to see the end of JobKeeper, a collapse in immigration, therefore a collapse in international student education numbers, most international students. So you've seen new apartment approvals obviously dive. The market for apartments is really tapered off. The state government has continued to invest record amounts and has a unprecedented program in civil construction, which will keep activity industry bubbling along. And then, much to our delight, the state government has announced a large-scale social housing program, which is the biggest in Australian history, of more than $5 billion to deliver more than 10,000 homes. Now, that's a massive thing. And that will really keep our industry not on a Bunsen burner level, but should keep it alive during the downturn. It's critically important, though, because the construction industry is about the third largest industry in Victoria, pays about 40% of the taxes, really has been one of the growth engines of Victoria, and has worked in partnership with immigration for many years now as the city's grown, as we've become one of the service capitals of the world.
So the pandemic has impacted us all right across the board, which is why it was so important that industry band together and call for a GFC style and size response. And it's great to see government across Australia stepping up to the plate at a federal and state level to do this. Stimulus does take time to wash through, but we all understand that for just a little while, government will be the main game in town, and that's absolutely the role of government. So we want to see that happen quickly and happen for a long period of time. It's also a role for insurers to play. It is absolutely critical that insurance agencies remind building owners, facility managers, and body corporates that if they are not keeping their fire protection systems up to date and up to standard, then they're in breach of their insurance and they need to operate with no haste to get that situation rectified.
Believe it or not, there are some positive things that have happened out of COVID, and that is collaboration. And that's with, from developers, builders, employers, employees, unions. We really sat down to nut out something we've never, ever had, the challenges before. So, the positive thing that come out of COVID is the relationship of working together and keeping each other safe and our families safe. And at the same time, pay off our mortgages and keep our businesses afloat. So, the collaboration has been a big plus.
I think the industry has learned how to work together in very unique and challenging circumstances. And I think there's enormous goodwill across the industry and to realise our shared goal, which is to keep functioning and keep strong, keep businesses strong, keep workers employed, and to have a strong pipeline of work so that we have a secure future together. So I think that's the great thing that's come out of the pandemic, is our ability to come together in crisis has meant that there's relationships that will stand the test of time.
I think that the industry has learnt to be very adaptable and has also learnt to be very resilient as well. And also they've had to diversify in terms of the service that they offer to consumers. I think that they're more receptive to connecting online as opposed to always going face to face. And they're seeing the benefits of perhaps not having to travel by having online meetings. And we've also seen a large increase in training, online training, where members have decided that it might be time to upskill and reskill, and they've taken the ability and jumped on board and undertaken the training.
Just generally, the situation of the last 12 months have required us to be more adaptive, more flexible, more responsive and resilient. And these are good traits for us all to have and for us all to keep front of mind. A snap back or just a complete reversion to the mean, in my view, would be a failure and a failure of us all. And it's not something that we're going to do. So what we need to do as an industry is cherry pick the positives that have come out of this and apply them going forward. And combine them with what we've always done well, productively building safe and habitable buildings for the Australian community. And moving forward, we'll definitely use them to kick a few goals as well.
The industry's learnt a lot. It's learnt a lot around the impact that any sorts of infections can have. So purely from a health perspective and a workplace safety perspective, there's been an enormous amount of learnings around the ways that we can protect ourselves as a community and in workplaces around viruses, and it doesn't have to be COVID. It's things like the common cold. It's things like stomach infections and the like. What we have put in place during COVID in infection controls is something, hopefully, that will have lasting impacts on workplace culture. But more so from our perspective, obviously as an employer association, or an association that has as its members around 1,000 plumbing businesses, employing probably something like 6,000 plumbers, is the impact and the wake-up call many businesses got on business continuity. So businesses now, I think, are much more aware that they need to have plans in place for these types of situations. Things like making sure they have adequate cash flow. And we know right across this industry, cash flow is always a concern. People work on very low margins and just-in-time payments. that model itself was really challenged during this crisis when the work closed down. Things like flexible work locations and the implications that have on cyber security, the ability for businesses to actually continue their businesses when the office itself was closed. Now that doesn't just relate to COVID, that can relate to any sort of natural disaster, or it can relate to closures of certain areas. But the impact there on business continuity hopefully is something that people did learn a lot from. But more so, even business models. What we saw during COVID is a number of businesses go to the wall, and many businesses struggle because the business model they had, the particular market that they operated in, was one that was severely impacted. So if you, for instance, were working in a business where you're a very large percent, or perhaps all of your business was in sending people in to do maintenance in big commercial multi-storey buildings or in schools, well, when those things close, what do you do? So I think there are big lessons also for businesses around diversity, around making sure that they are in a position, should one sector of the industry close down or slow down, that they can pivot into other areas. That will work for some and it won't work for others. But what I think is really important is businesses are aware of that, they plan for that, and they go into any particular market or sector of the industry with their eyes wide open after COVID, knowing what the consequences of that might be. So I think that's been a really big lesson, and it's a very positive thing for businesses to do. In an ongoing sense, business continuity is absolutely critical.
I feel members have also felt, when COVID first hit back in sort of March, April, it was quite doom and gloom. They really didn't know how they were going to pay their staff, how they were going to manage it. Did they have to let people go? And I think it was just that as an association, Master Plumbers was there really to support them. We were advocating at all levels of government to ensure that plumbers were an essential worker. And so that gave the members, some sense of hope that they'd be able to continue undertaking the role that they were doing each and every day.
So business confidence is critical, and confidence generally comes from certainty, which is something that has been hard for us all to have, but we've become more adaptive and resilient businesses, people and workers as a result of that, which can only be a good thing in the long term. So there are some silver linings there, but I think the important thing that we all need to understand, and the world needs to understand, is that Australia has a good story to tell. There's two places in the whole world that have gone well in managing this, and they're Australia and South Korea. It just so happens that South Korea is next to North Korea. So we have got a good story to tell for international investment and investment in our building and construction industry. And I think that it's imperative that all levels of decision makers and stakeholders put their shoulder to the wheel to communicating that message.
Well, we did a number of surveys throughout the COVID crisis of our members. We did one in April and another one in September. And probably the headline statistic coming out of that is 77% or 3 in 4 of businesses saw a very negative impact on their business from COVID. Now, that's not exactly rocket science. I think that would apply across a whole range of sectors, but maybe up to 10% of businesses, varies depending on which sector of the industry they're in, closed down and went out of business in one form or another. Businesses cut down their workforce. Around 4 in 10 businesses cut down their workforce over this period. 44% reduced their business hours, and nearly 1 in 4 businesses had to cut down their services in one form or another. Now, the role that industry associations and unions played throughout this crisis is incredibly important. The support that we've provided to our members as an employer association helped many of these through the crisis. In fact, we saw our membership grow to record levels, which I think just demonstrates the fact that the industry has come together. It has provided information to its constituents, whether that be businesses or employees, and done its very, very best to keep everybody safe, healthy, and in work during this entire period of time.
Incolink's members endured a great period of uncertainty during those times, but during those times, if they were in trouble, we were there to help catch them. We really are the safety net for the construction industry. So we provided entitlements when they needed it, but also we were there for on-site COVID-19 testing to keep them working, but COVID-19 payments should they be stood down, but also counselling available anytime, financial counselling, and also your normal run-of-the-mill counselling for periods when you're in difficulty or when you're not coping. That sees us deliver about 5,000 counselling sessions per year. It's a critical part of our service and a critical part of us remaining kind of the safety net for workers. So we saw a lot more people accessing those services during COVID-19. So it was a financially uncertain time. It was an uncertain time for many families, and it was an uncertain time just about people's place in the world, because construction work is all consuming. Long hours, job-based, often changing jobs. It's a difficult industry to work in, and for it to be suddenly removed or to be at risk of being removed is a difficult time for our members.
Absolutely, the pandemic has sped up a few guys' retirement, and also definitely some apprentices are on downtime or are unemployed, and some of the employers, because things are quiet, haven't employed apprentices. So we have to have a real focus about skill shortages over the next couple of years where we catch up, and that skills gap of missing, guys who turned 63, 62, who decided to call quits early. So it's something as an industry we have to focus on about training.
I think the future in the plumbing and gas industry is very exciting. There's many opportunities and changes. One of the areas that we're working and leading the way in is hydrogen. IAPMO is now on the Hydrogen Standards Committee, representing the industry. We also are testing hydrogen products, and we're working with the governments to try and implement hydrogen as a replacement or an additive to natural gas and natural gas distribution. So hydrogen is a really exciting part of our future, and something that I know that IAPMO and PICAC are working together to try and be the leaders in that section of the industry. The other areas that are happening are efficiency, looking at efficiency of gas appliances and gas usage. It's an exciting part of the industry, and many manufacturers are now producing extremely efficient gas appliances. So that's something that's improving all the time, and as another exciting area of the gas industry. Also efficiency in the usage of water. We're seeing a lot of products now that are improving their efficiency to reduce the consumption of water and reduce the amount of water that they use. So that's another area that we're working on and testing and certifying too. Talking about water, I think there's another issue that the industry is trying to address, and that's the amount of lead in brass that touches or affects potable water. So a number of industry leaders and organisations are working with the Australian standards to try and reduce that amount of lead to the safest possible levels. So I think they're the three main areas that we're looking at in the future, and are exciting areas that we'll see continue in the short term and long term in the plumbing and gas industries.
Always a very difficult question to answer. I guess the future is easy with hindsight. But look, seriously, I think with the vaccine in place, there's very clear signs that the economy is back in a growth phase, and a lot of the commentators are saying that the economy is growing a lot faster than they thought it would. How much of that is catch up, I don't think we yet know. But the COVID vaccine is not just a benefit to people's health and well-being, and provides obviously protection and hopefully transmission of the virus, but it boosts business confidence, it boosts consumer confidence. And that's absolutely critical in any market sector. If we see consumers back in work, and remember, many of them lost their jobs. They lost their jobs, they don't have the money to fund the works that they want done in their house, whether it's renovation or repair or whatever. If we see that confidence returning, consumer confidence, business confidence, we see investment returning, we see businesses growing and employing people, we see more plumbers and other workers coming into industries and into training. That's the critical thing about confidence, and something we all want to see. We want to see the industry not just recover from this, but actually move on to an entirely new phase where it can be more sustainable and more resistant to these types of shocks.
Green hydrogen is a bit of a no-brainer, and it all comes down to cost of a kilowatt. And the smarter and the better we get it at things, is the answer for our energy. The solutions for the future. Now, green hydrogen is no brainer. Like if it's it's cutting water apart and having water vapor, but you're getting energy out of the hydrogen, and feeding it. And we've seen it around the world. When we went to Copenhagen and went to Europe, the Japanese, the people are, the really progressive countries are now moving into green hydrogen, and by using the sun and water, we're getting energy. So again, it's easy to say not a non-brainer, but I'll talk about where I live in Melbourne, and we've got $6-7 billion worth of infrastructure in the ground, and every house is piped up to natural gas. So I mean, putting streaming hydrogen into the gas lines all the way to hydrogen, the infrastructure's there, so it's nothing, and it's a real no-brainer. So hydrogen we're excited about, and we're certainly lobbying governments to get behind hydrogen for the future.
So volume of work is always a challenge, and it's something that it's been great to see government step up to the plate and respond to, but it's an issue that's there nevertheless, the forward pipeline of work. And situations like these are motivators for people that are always around the place trying to water down a trade or water down standards that are associated with the trade. Fire protection people across Australia understand the importance of the work that they do. They understand the importance of a licence structure based on qualifications and standards and competency of skills. They understand that they want to continue to improve and work hard to deliver for the Australian community, which is just something that we're all really proud of. So these are some of the challenges that we face, but together we're up to them, and we'll just keep providing.
We are thrilled that the Queensland Government is partnering with industry associations such as ours and unions to support the Queensland Apprenticeship Centre at Pycac in Beenleigh. Recently, we hosted our State Treasurer and our ministers there for the sod turning. It was such a great day where they could come along and see the beginning, and then obviously due for completion in November this year, which we're looking forward to the opening once it's all completed. The centre will really provide apprentices the opportunity to learn training, which is delivered by industry for industry. And I think that that's going to be the key outcome of the future generations coming through. It is really important that we keep training for the future. And we want to diversify to make sure that we are training in hydrogen, which is the new training that's coming through. We want to make sure that our apprentices are aware of what that looks like and that they're being trained in the Centre of Excellence at Beenleigh. We also know that the completion rates at Pycac in Beenleigh is also extremely high, and we want to be able to continue that through so that employers are requesting that their apprentices get trained at Beenleigh.
Looking into the future though, I see an incredible future for the construction industry and for Melbourne particularly. And that is because people around the world will look at Australia and they will think, I want to live there. We will have had a number of years without immigration, population would have slowed, the economy will have maintained some level of robustness unseen in the rest of the world, So the Australian economy will be absolutely turbocharged by an immigration boom. Usual immigration sits at around 200,000 a year. I would be very surprised if that wasn't lifted to 300,000 a year in the years that we recover. International students will come flooding back because this is the destination in the world to be. Here in New Zealand, there is not another place to be. So I see in years to come, the construction industry booming. And within that, I see there is a few challenges for us to meet. One is diversity. We need to improve the number of women in construction so that we can meet the challenge of providing new jobs. And we also need to continue to search for emerging and new technologies so that we can continue to meet consumer demand. And that's where places like PICAC and Plumbers play such an integral role, because it's a little known, but plumbers are at the forefront of combating climate change. And if you want someone to lessen your water bill or your electricity bill, plumbers play the key or a key role. So I see a burgeoning future for places like PICAC and the specialist industry training they do to keep our industry at its most productive. And I see a growing workforce over many years with greater industry cooperation.